If you're over 60 and you're watching this, you may feel like as though your calling is behind you. But I'm here to tell you, biblically and boldly, it's not over. You haven't missed it. You're not finished. In fact, God may just be getting started with you. Let's walk through 10 clear, direct truths from the Bible about what God expects and empowers those over 60 to do. You don't need to guess anymore. You don't need to stay stuck. You are needed, chosen, and called right now. Shall we begin? You may feel forgotten, you may feel sidelined, like your usefulness has passed and your story is winding down. But let me ask you this. Who told you your last chapter couldn't be your most powerful? Because when God holds the pen, age is not a period. It's a comma. Take Anna Mary Robertson Moses, better known to the world as Grandma Moses. Born in 1860, she lived the life of a rural farmer's wife, raising children, churning butter, and tending to daily chores. There was no gallery, no spotlight, no applause, just steady, faithful life. And when arthritis made her give up embroidery in her late 70s, she didn't sit around waiting to die. She picked up a paintbrush for the first time in her life. She was 78. Her first painting was done on a piece of cardboard. She had no formal training, no mentors, no fancy materials, just years of memory, detail, and imagination built up from decades of living. She painted scenes of farm life, community, and faith with a kind of vividness that could only come from someone who had lived every stroke. And people took notice. Her paintings became nationally recognized. By her 80s and 90s, she was an icon. Her works sold for tens of thousands of dollars. Not bad for a woman who started painting when most people were preparing to bury their dreams. You know what her story tells us? That it's not too late. That maybe, just maybe, the reason you're still breathing is because your greatest impact hasn't happened yet. That reminds me of someone else, Caleb. Joshua 14 tells us the kind of man he was. A warrior, a spy, a believer when everyone else doubted. He stood next to Joshua when they first scouted the Promised Land, and at 40 years old, he said, "We can take it." But the people didn't listen, so he waited, and waited, and waited. 45 years passed. Now imagine this. Caleb is 85 years old, and he walks up to Joshua, probably with a weathered face and a strong back, and says, "I am still as strong today as the day Moses sent me out. I'm ready. Now give me this mountain," Joshua 14:11-12. He wasn't asking for a rocking chair. He was asking for a fight, a mountain filled with giants, a land that had been promised. He wasn't done. He was just getting started. That's the spirit God is looking for, not people who slow down, but people who rise up. Not retirees of faith, but refirees of courage. And here's the twist you didn't see coming. The younger generation is waiting for someone like you, yes, you, to speak up. They may act like they don't care. They may roll their eyes. But what they're craving is someone who's walked through fire and lived to talk about it. Someone who can say, "I've been where you are and I made it through." Not with perfection, but with perspective. You think they don't listen because they don't respect you, but often it's because they don't know you. They've never heard your story. They've never seen your scars. They don't know the battles you've fought or the God who carried you. But what if you told them? What if you walked into a school no one wants to go to and said, "Let me show you kindness"? What if you sat in the break room with a young co-worker and asked, "How's your heart?" What if you stopped praying for the perfect moment and realized this is the moment? There's a generation starving for wisdom, but they're being fed by influencers instead of elders. And if you stay silent, TikTok will disciple your grandchildren. If you give up, bitterness will define your final years. Instead, of blessing. Don't let that happen. This isn't about going back to what you were. It's about stepping into who you are. At this stage of your life, you have more to give than ever before. You've got the bruises, the beauty, the regret, and the redemption. You've got stories that will heal wounds, eyes that see what others miss, and time, oh, the time, to invest where it really matters. So don't settle, don't wither, don't sit quietly in the corner of the church, waiting for someone to notice you. This is your moment, your mountain is still waiting. And God, the same God who used Moses at 80, Abraham at 75, and Caleb at 85, he's not done with you. He's just getting started. Let's climb. Caleb's mountain moment isn't just a story of physical strength. It's a spiritual mindset. He could have easily sat back and said, I've done my part. But instead, he said, I still have a part to play. And maybe that's what God is whispering to you right now. You still have something to offer. You still have a mountain to take. But to move forward, you've got to silence the voice of complaint and awaken the heart of contribution. A few years ago, I met a man named Thomas, a retired mechanic in his early 70s, widowed, living alone, estranged from his kids, and bitter. Really bitter. Every conversation started with a complaint about how the world had changed, how the church was too loud, how the young people were disrespectful, how nobody cared anymore. He would come to church, sit in the back pew with arms folded, and when service ended, he was always the first one out the door. One Sunday the pastor preached on Philippians 2:14. Do all things without grumbling. That word all landed like a stone in Thomas's chest. Not some things, not easy things, all. After the service, the pastor walked right up to him and gently said, Brother Thomas, I think you have more to give than complaints. And then he walked away. No lecture, no argument, just that seed. Thomas didn't come to church the next 2 Sundays, but on the third, he was back. This time, sitting in the second row. Something had shifted. What nobody knew was that during those 2 weeks, Thomas had gone home and looked through old photos of his life, his wife, his kids, his garage, his first house, even the photo of his baptism back in 1964. And it hit him. I've spent more time talking about what I lost than thanking God for what I had. He wept for hours. And then he did something no one expected. He called the pastor and said, I want to serve. I don't know where, but I want to be useful again. That week he started volunteering at a local trade school, teaching basic car repair to teenage boys from fatherless homes. He'd bring old engines and say, we're going to fix this, just like God's fixing us. The boys loved him. He taught them how to change oil, yes, but more than that, how to show up, how to be patient, how to pray when things got frustrating. But here's the twist. 6 months later, his estranged son showed up to class. Not to learn about cars, but because he heard that his father was different now. That classroom became their reunion ground, and that relationship healed. What changed? Thomas stopped being a reservoir of regret and became a fountain of wisdom. Complaining is a trap. It feels like truth, but it's actually a slow form of spiritual suicide. It makes you the victim. It feeds bitterness. It blocks gratitude. Philippians 2:14 doesn't say, don't complain if things are good. It says, do all things without grumbling. That means in retirement. That means in sickness. That means even when you feel forgotten. Because complaining won't change your life, but contributing will. Too many over 60 are stuck in a loop of they don't listen to us and these kids are lost, when God is saying, speak life, teach, serve, lead. Your complaints aren't drawing people to you, they're driving them away. You're not being ignored because of your age. You're being avoided because your words don't heal, they sting. But that can change. Start small. Bless the barista at the coffee shop. Encourage the young couple at church instead of judging them. Offer to help at a school. Write your testimony down and post it online. You'd be shocked at how your voice can reach places you've never been. Do you know how many young people are scrolling, searching for someone real? Someone who's not chasing trends, but who's lived through storms and still has joy. That's you. Don't use your age as a reason to disconnect. Use it as a bridge to reconnect. Instead of saying, "I'm too old for this," say, "God's not done with me yet." Instead of repeating, "These young people don't get it," say, "Let me show them what I've learned." Your role isn't to be the audience. You're supposed to be the anchor, the lighthouse, the steady hands on shaky shoulders. Every day you're alive is proof that God still has work for you to do. Complaining is not your calling. Contribution is. That spark in your chest when you hear these words, that's not nostalgia. That's the Holy Spirit saying, "Let's go again." It's not too late, but it is time. Let's get to work. It's amazing how the moment you stop complaining is often the moment you start hearing again. When the noise of regret dies down, the whisper of purpose gets clearer. And for many over 60, that whisper isn't saying, "Remember the good old days?" It's saying, "I'm not finished with you yet," because the truth is, you don't just have a memory of a calling, you still have one. And it's not fading, it's just shifting. Romans 11:29 says it boldly, "The gifts and calling of God are irrevocable." That means they don't expire, they don't wear out. They don't retire when you do. Your legs may not run like they used to. Your back may ache more than it did. But your calling's still alive, still needed. Let me tell you about a man named Harold, a former missionary to Peru who had to come home at 68 after a heart issue nearly took his life. For almost 40 years, he had poured himself into the villages of the Andes, preaching under tarps in monsoon rains, laying bricks for churches with his bare hands, baptizing new believers in freezing rivers. But when he got back to the States, he found himself lost, forgotten, even in his own church. No one asked him to lead a Bible study. No one asked for his story. It was like once he stepped off the field, people assumed he had nothing left to give. He sat quietly on the third row for 2 years. 2 years. Just watching, listening, silently wondering if God had shelved him. One Sunday, the youth pastor got up and said, "We're taking a group of students to South America this summer. We'll need a translator and someone who understands the culture. Pray with us." That was it. No ask, no call to action. But Harold didn't wait to be asked. He just walked up after service and said, "I'd like to help." The pastor smiled politely and said, "That'd be great," probably thinking Harold was just being nice. But the following week, Harold showed up with a full binder. It had maps, contact names, cultural tips, phrases in Spanish and Quechua, a packing list, even recipes for local dishes the students could expect. It was like a spark had come alive in him, not because he was back in Peru, but because he was walking in purpose again. Fast forward 6 months, that youth trip turned into a revival, not because of flashy programs, but because every night after service, Harold would gather the kids under the stars and tell them stories, raw stories, about demonic oppression, miraculous healings, near-death moments, and lives transformed. He didn't speak like a motivational speaker. He spoke like a man who had scars. And because of that, they listened. Here's the twist. 3 of those students are now missionaries in Latin America. One is a church planter in Chile. Another married a Peruvian pastor and stayed to run an orphanage. And all of them trace the turning point not to a sermon, but to Harold. You may not be the one building the house anymore, but you are absolutely still called to bless the builders. The mistake many over 60 make is thinking their usefulness ended when their position changed. But God's calling isn't tied to a platform. It's tied to His purpose. And His purpose for you doesn't have a stopwatch. In fact, your experience is the exact thing this next generation is starving for. Maybe your calling is to speak encouragement when everyone else is speaking fear. Maybe it's to pray like no one else will. Maybe it's to mentor young women who never had a mother figure. Maybe it's to share your story online, even if your hands tremble while typing. Maybe it's to quietly show up for the single mom who parks near you at church. Your maybe might be someone else's miracle. And here's the powerful truth. Sometimes your calling in this season isn't to build the thing, but to bless the one building. Just like Aaron and Hur lifted Moses' arms in Exodus 17 so the battle could be won, your role might be to hold up someone else's hands. That's not a lesser role. It's a life-saving one. Don't underestimate what your presence means. Don't assume that if you're not preaching, you're not powerful. Your calm voice might break through the panic of a teenager's worst day. Your wisdom might prevent a young couple's divorce. Your handshake might be the first loving touch someone has felt all week. The enemy wants you to believe that your best days are behind you, that you missed your chance, that your role is to coast, not contribute. But that's a lie, because your calling is irrevocable. And if you're still breathing, you're still called. Let that sink in. You're not here to fade out. You're here to pass the torch and light a few fires while you're at it. So stop disqualifying yourself. Stop shrinking back. Stop saying, that was for when I was younger. Number, it's for now, this moment, this season, this part of your life when you have more to offer than ever. Not because of what you can do, but because of who you've become. God isn't just calling you back into the fight. He's reminding you that you were never taken out of it. So pick up your voice, pick up your Bible, pick up your purpose, and go bless the builders. Because your calling didn't retire, it just got wiser. So if your calling didn't retire and your wisdom was never meant to be stored away, then what now? What do you do when your hands don't build like they used to, and your days feel slower than before? You speak life, because your tongue has the power to heal wounds that time hasn't. And this generation, this broken, anxious, searching generation, needs your voice more than ever. Sometimes the greatest act of faith isn't climbing a mountain or moving overseas. It's looking into the tired eyes of someone 30 years younger and saying, "You're going to be okay." God still has you those words. They might be the difference between someone walking away from their calling or running back to it. There's a story I'll never forget, the kind that carves itself into your bones because of how real it was. It happened in a small-town diner just outside of Memphis, Tennessee. A woman named Margaret, age 74, sat in her usual booth, her hands wrapped around a chipped coffee cup, steam curling up into the stale morning air. She had been a schoolteacher for 42 years, the kind of teacher who bought her own supplies, stayed after class to pray with students, and cried on graduation day like every child was her own. But now she was widowed, living alone, her joints stiff with arthritis and her home filled with quiet. Her children lived states away, too busy to visit, though they loved her in the kind of distant, calendar-bound way so common in our world. She came to that diner every Tuesday and Thursday, not for the pancakes, but for the people, because Margaret had made a quiet vow: "I will not leave this world silent." That morning, a young waitress named Jasmine spilled a tray of dishes. The crash was loud, and heads turned. She froze, trembling, lips quivering with panic. Her manager shouted. Customers rolled their eyes. But Margaret did something else. She stood up, slowly, painfully, walked over, bent down, and helped pick up the shards of ceramic. Then she whispered something. I made worse messes than this and still ended up okay. Don't let one cracked plate define your whole shift. Jasmine burst into tears. Right there on the linoleum, that simple sentence, that voice of grace, cracked something wide open. Margaret didn't just leave a tip that day, she left a blessing, and she didn't stop. She came back week after week, asking about Jasmine's classes, her dreams, her fears. She prayed over her hands. She reminded her that she was seen. And here's the twist. Jasmine, a girl who once felt invisible, gave her life to Christ 6 months later. Not at church, not during a revival, but at Margaret's kitchen table over lukewarm tea and the Word of God. Why? Because someone spoke, someone encouraged, someone who had every earthly reason to sit in silence, but chose not to. Proverbs 18:21 doesn't exaggerate. Life and death are in the power of the tongue. When you've lived long, you've seen what words can do. They can kill hope, or they can resurrect it. They can crush a child's dream, or they can pull someone back from the brink. This world doesn't need more noise. It needs your voice. It needs elders who speak blessing instead of bitterness, who mentor the reckless instead of mocking them, who say, "I see gold in you," when everyone else is seeing garbage. Your tongue is a loaded weapon. Use it to disarm fear. Use it to silence shame. Use it to call out destiny in those who forgot they had one. You may think your words fall flat, that young people aren't listening. But here's the truth. They are. They're starving for it. A compliment from an elder hits different. It carries weight. It carries history. It carries heaven if you let it. Speak life in line at the grocery store. Speak grace in your Uber. Speak hope in the hospital waiting room. Speak truth over your grandkids. Speak destiny into your Sunday school class. Even if they roll their eyes, speak anyway, because you might be the only voice in their life that isn't trying to get something from them. You're not looking for followers or applause, you're looking to pour out, and that's exactly what makes your words so powerful. Your age does not disqualify you from being used. It qualifies you to be a living letter of encouragement, one that walks into rooms and changes atmospheres, one that breaks generational curses, one that puts courage back into the discouraged. You are not too old to speak life. You are not too tired to bless. And if you ask God to fill your mouth with His Spirit, you'll find that He's been waiting for the chance to use your voice all along. So stop holding back. Stop thinking you have to be a preacher to preach. You can preach with a smile, with a question, with a story, with a text message, with a whisper. Be the encourager you wish you had when you were younger, because chances are someone around you is praying for the voice you already carry. And if your words have power, so do your prayers. You may feel like your voice is unheard in the chaos of this younger generation. You may feel like your encouragement bounces off hardened hearts. But if no one listens, God still does. And some of the most powerful things you'll ever say won't be in public. They'll be whispered in your prayer closet. When speaking doesn't work, intercede. When your hands are too tired to build, lift them in prayer. And when bitterness threatens to grow roots in your soul, dig them out with tears before the throne of grace. Because bitterness might feel like protection, but it's really a prison. It locks you in with the very pain you're trying to escape. But when you pray over your pain, you turn it into a weapon. That's what Job did. Job didn't get double restoration when he argued. He didn't get it when he mourned. He got it when he prayed for his friends. Job 42:10 is clear. The Lord restored Job's fortunes when he prayed for his friends. That wasn't just an act of forgiveness, it was a declaration of war against bitterness. There's a woman in Charleston, South Carolina. Her name is Elaine. She's 81 years old now. Her hair is silver, her back slightly hunched, but her eyes burn with a kind of gentle fire. When you see her walking into the sanctuary every Sunday with her tattered Bible and prayer journal wrapped in a rubber band, you wouldn't guess she was once known in her neighborhood as the bitter widow. Her husband died young, 49 years old. A sudden stroke took him on a Tuesday morning while fixing a leaky pipe under their kitchen sink. They had been planning a trip to the mountains. They never made it. She wore black for a year, and even when the dresses changed, the darkness didn't. Her children began to avoid her. They said she was too intense, too critical, too cold. She said she was realistic. But the truth? Elaine was angry. At God, at her family, at the world. And the years added up. By the time she turned 70, none of her 4 children spoke to her. She came to church alone, sat in the back, left during the last song. Until one Sunday, a guest preacher came and spoke a message about intercession. He said something that stabbed through her chest like lightning in a storm. The enemy wants your silence. He wants your bitterness because he knows your prayers still scare him. Elaine went home, knelt down on arthritic knees, and for the first time in decades, she cried out for her children, not to come visit her, but for God to visit them. She prayed over their marriages, over their kids, over wounds she had helped cause. She confessed, she forgave, she blessed. She didn't just say, bring them home. She said, make them whole. And then she did it again, the next night, and the next. For 3 years straight, Elaine filled journal after journal with names, tears, scripture, and declarations. She stopped waiting for apologies. She started asking for healing. Here's the twist. On her 75th birthday, she got 4 unexpected phone calls, 1 from each child. All 4 said the same thing in different ways. I don't know why, but I felt like I needed to call you today. One by one, they came home. One by one, they forgave her. One by one, she led them in prayer, some for the first time in decades. Today, her family fills 2 pews every Sunday morning. Elaine didn't get her restoration by begging for attention. She got it by interceding for redemption. That bitterness you feel, that ache in your bones when your kids don't call, that sting when no one asks for your advice, that anger at what they said, how they ignored you, how they've forgotten everything you gave. You can either let it poison your soul, or you can use it as fuel to pray like never before. You don't have to post about it. You don't have to vent to your neighbor. You don't have to drown it in another cup of regret. You just have to pray and trust that the God who hears in secret will answer in the open. Intercession is warfare. It's standing in the gap. It's saying, devil, you can't have my children. You can't have my legacy. You can't have my peace. It's praying blessings over people who haven't deserved them. It's choosing mercy when you have every right to stay mad. And here's the mystery of the kingdom. When you bless others, God blesses you. When you release people from your anger, He releases you from your pain. When you pray for them, He starts rebuilding you. So if you're over 60 and tempted to wallow in what you've lost, get on your knees and pray over what's still possible. Pray for the nurses, for the Uber drivers, for the teachers, for your grandkids, for the ones who rejected you. Pray for the ones you loved most who left you behind. Pray not with bitterness, but with broken-hearted boldness. You might not see the results in a week, maybe not even in a year, but heaven will. And when heaven sees, everything changes. You don't need a microphone to change lives. You need a prayer life that refuses to quit. That's where legacy begins. Not in what you leave behind, but in what you lift up before the throne. And sometimes the healing that your prayers begin in secret must be carried further by the words you speak in public. Because restoration doesn't just flow from what you pray for. It flows from what you say. You can pray for reconciliation, but poison it with the words you release into the air. You can cry out for peace, yet carry a sword in your tongue. The Holy Spirit doesn't just dwell in our prayers. He wants to dwell in our conversations. Bitterness becomes a cycle when you pray for healing but speak from hurt. And many parents and grandparents unknowingly sabotage the very relationships they beg God to restore with their words. They don't realize that the next generation doesn't just hear what they say, they absorb it. It lingers, it echoes, it builds a story in their heads of what you think about them. And often, it's not the story you intended to tell. There's a man named Earl I met during a conference in Phoenix, Arizona. He was 74, tall, broad-shouldered, with hands that looked like they'd built a dozen homes. His grip was still strong, but when he spoke, it was with a heaviness that couldn't be missed. He had 3 sons, all alive, all healthy, but none of them spoke to him. Not for years. He said it started with arguments over the holidays, differences in politics, faith, how to raise grandkids, how to live life. Nothing unusual, just generational tension. But tension turned to silence, and he told me, I only said what was true. I only told them what they needed to hear. I didn't curse them. I didn't yell. But I was honest. And I asked him a question that stopped him in his tracks. Were you kind? He looked at the floor, his throat tightened, and he said something I'll never forget. I don't think I knew how to be. Earl had spent a lifetime in survival mode, military, construction, providing for his family. Discipline was his love language, and truth was his weapon. But in trying to prepare his sons for the world, he'd unknowingly wounded them, with every word meant to toughen them up. He didn't swear, he didn't scream, but his silence after their failures said more than a lecture ever could. His disappointment was a fog that followed them into adulthood. And now, in his 70s, Earl was reaping the silence he had sown. That night Earl broke down, not from guilt, but from revelation. He realized he hadn't been speaking from wisdom. He'd been speaking from fear, fear that they'd fail, fear that they'd grow soft, fear that they'd make the same mistakes he did. But fear isn't the voice of God. After the conference, he started calling them. Not with sermons, but with blessings. Not to correct, but to connect. He sent texts that didn't say, you should have, but I'm proud of you. He started mailing old photos with handwritten notes like, you always made me proud, even when I didn't say it. And one by one they responded, the middle son first, then the oldest, and finally the youngest, the one who had moved across the country to start over. They didn't have some cinematic reunion, but the conversations began. And in those conversations, healing began too. Proverbs 16:24 says, gracious words are a honeycomb, sweet to the soul and healing to the bones. You know what that means? Your words can heal bones, generational bones, wounded memories, fractured relationships, but harsh words can break bones too, bones that never heal right. If you're over 60 and wondering why the younger generation doesn't come around anymore, don't just blame the culture. Don't just say, they're too sensitive. Ask yourself, do my words build bridges or do they burn them? Kindness is not weakness. Softness is not compromise. Speaking life doesn't mean you ignore sin. It means you invite redemption. The enemy wants you to believe your only power is your experience. But God says your tongue holds power. Power to bless, power to restore, power to draw the next generation back into your arms, not by control, but by compassion. Some of you need to stop waiting for your children to speak first. You need to bless them, even if they haven't earned it. You need to call out their destiny, not just critique their choices. You need to be the elder who doesn't just tell stories of the past, but speaks prophecy into their future. Stop saying, "They don't listen to me." Start asking, "What have I been saying?" Let your words be like honey, words that taste like home, words that break curses, words that resurrect dreams, words that reflect the heart of a God who never stops speaking love, even to those who reject him. You don't need a platform to change lives. You need a mouth that refuses to be a hammer when it can be a healing balm. You may never get to preach on a stage, but every interaction at the grocery store, in the Uber, at the doctor's office, is a pulpit, and every word you speak is a sermon. So speak life, bless the barista, encourage the young mother, thank the janitor, compliment your nurse. Speak gently to your child, even if they don't respond. They're listening more than you think. The words you speak today might be the reason someone comes home tomorrow. Let them be sweet, let them be strong, let them be like Christ. But what if your mouth could drip with honey instead of vinegar? What if instead of using your words to relive old wounds, you used them to call out life in someone who's forgotten theirs? That's the shift we must make, from bitterness to blessing. And once your words begin to heal again, your feet must follow. This next part won't be comfortable, Binti, but it will be necessary. There was a woman named Dolores Martinez. She was 72 when she first stepped into a juvenile detention center in South Texas, not as a visitor, not as someone's grandma, but as a volunteer. Trembling, unsure, and wildly out of her depth. Her husband had died 2 years earlier. Her children had moved away. Her church didn't know what to do with her anymore. She felt invisible, folded into a pew like a forgotten hymnal. But something wouldn't let her stay quiet. She'd heard about a local ministry that served incarcerated youth and thought, they don't want someone like me, but maybe they need someone like me. So she went. Her first day in that center, she was laughed at. One of the boys called her Abuela Loca. But she came back the next week, and the next. She didn't preach. She listened. She handed out journals and wrote names down to pray over. She brought cookies and Bibles. She wept with a boy who hadn't had a visitor in 5 years. She told them stories of her own broken childhood in Mexico, the way God found her in a dirty alley in Juarez. How Grace interrupted a suicide attempt when she was just 15. They stopped calling her crazy. They started calling her Mama D. Within a year, that group of boys who used to fight and curse through Bible studies were asking her to pray over them before court hearings. One of them, 16-year-old Reggie, wrote her a letter the day he was released. It said, "I don't think I believe in God yet, but I believe you." And that's a start. That letter is framed in her house today. Above it hangs a print of Isaiah 6:8. Here I am. Send me. Let's be clear. This wasn't easy for Dolores. She was tired. Her hands ached. She didn't understand all the slang or the music or the tattoos. She was nervous every single time she walked into that facility. But she went anyway. She went because no one else was going. That's what we're calling you to do. You over 60, you who feel left behind by culture, you who think you've outlived your usefulness. That is a lie from the pit of hell. You haven't missed your calling. You've matured into it. There are children in abandoned schools waiting for someone to read them a story and remind them they matter. There are refugees who don't speak the language but will know the language of your smile. There are overworked nurses who will weep when you show up in the hospital waiting room just to pray over patients you don't even know. There are inner city kids who've never met a grandparent who cares. You can be that grandparent. You don't need to be cool. You need to be consistent. You don't need to preach from a stage. You need to show up in places others ignore. You don't need to go viral. You need to go where the Spirit says, go. God never said retire. He said go. He never said slow down. He said pick up your cross. He never said leave it to the young. He said follow me. Isaiah didn't raise his hand because he had all the answers. He said, here I am. period. That was enough for God to send him, and it's enough for you to be sent too. This isn't about busyness, it's about obedience. And if you say yes, God will open doors you never imagined. You'll find fire where you thought there was only ash, and your last chapters might just become your most powerful. So stop saying someone should go, that someone might be you. Some of you reading this right now felt a spark while reading about Dolores walking into the juvenile center. You thought, maybe I could do something like that. But then a louder voice came in, the one that always shows up. Who would listen to someone like me? What would I even say? And just like that, you put yourself back on the shelf. But the shelf is where Satan wants you. Silent, forgotten, harmless. But here's what you need to know. Your story is a weapon, and not just for use, for someone else's freedom. Revelation 12:11 says, they overcame by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. Think about that. Not just by Jesus' blood, but by your voice. The story of what you've walked through, survived, failed at, and been redeemed from. That story carries overcoming power, but only if you tell it. Let me take you to a small retirement village in Ohio. Among the shuffleboards and knit hats was a quiet 83-year-old man named Gerald. He rarely spoke during chapel services. He came in, nodded politely, left early. Most thought he was just another sweet old man whose best days were buried in the photo albums on his shelf. But Gerald had lived a life that would have made Netflix documentaries jealous. He was a World War II medic. He watched men die in his arms. He held a friend's intestines in place with his bare hands during a battle in France. After the war, he returned home with a Bible and a bottle, more trauma than peace, more silence than healing. He spent 2 decades drinking himself numb, destroying his marriage and nearly his life. And then came Jesus. In 1973, drunk and alone on Christmas Eve, he stumbled into a midnight church service, not to worship, just to warm up. But what he heard that night cracked something inside him. A preacher simply said, "You are not too far gone." It sounded too simple, but Gerald wept like a child. And that's where the story began. Sobriety, healing, reconciliation with his son, the long road of forgiveness. But Gerald never told that story, not until a young volunteer named Maya came to the retirement center to help with tech support. She was 24, had a tattoo on her wrist that read, 1 Peter 5:10. She was full of passion and completely burned out. She had just walked away from ministry after her church leaders told her she wasn't mature enough to lead. That rejection nearly killed her calling. One afternoon, while helping Gerald set up his email, she casually asked, "Have you ever done ministry?" Gerald paused, looked at her, and for the first time in 5 decades he shared everything. Not with polished words, just raw memories, cracked with tears. The war, the bottle, the altar. Maya sat in stunned silence. At the end of his story, she said something that will never leave him. She whispered, "That just saved me." Gerald didn't preach a sermon. He didn't quote 10 verses. He told his story, and it changed someone else's. And that right there is the power you still carry, not on a pulpit, but in your mouth. You may not be able to travel the world anymore, but you can start a blog. You may not know how to shoot a viral video, but you can sit with a young person over coffee. You may not be famous, but you're faithful. And in God's economy, that's all that matters. Your story, your actual story, not the cleaned-up version, is someone's survival guide. The abortion you regret, someone's drowning in that shame right now. The addiction you broke, someone's on day 1 and doesn't believe freedom is possible. The marriage that was saved by grace, someone's praying to make it through tonight. If you don't tell it, the enemy wins twice. First, when he wounded you, and second, when he convinces you to stay silent. You are not a relic, you are a testimony on 2 feet. And the world doesn't need perfect stories, it needs honest ones. So here's your challenge. Tell it, post it, write it, record it, share it at Bible study, send it in a letter. Whatever you need to do, just don't bury it. Don't let shame write your silence. Don't let age convince you your story has expired. Don't let fear muzzle what heaven wants to echo through generations. Say what God did for you, even if your voice shakes. The blood of the Lamb has already been shed. Now all heaven is waiting for your part, your testimony. It's not just a story, it's a key. Someone is locked up in the same prison you once lived in. And your voice may be the one that sets them free. And that's the thing about your testimony. When you finally release it, you realize something startling. You're not done. God didn't preserve your life for nostalgia. He kept you here because you're still part of the plan. And while your role may look different now, make no mistake, you're still needed. You just might be asked to show up differently. There's a woman named Evelyn in West Texas, 91 years old, nearly blind, wheelchair-bound, lives in a modest assisted living home with floral drapes and plastic flowers on every table. Most of the staff assumed she was just another quiet senior. But Evelyn has a ministry most churches have overlooked. She intercedes. Every day at 4 a.m., while the facility sleeps and the nurses rest, Evelyn is wide awake. She can't read her Bible anymore, so she listens to the audio version over and over. Her hearing isn't great, but she says she can hear it in her soul. She prays by name for the nurses, for the pastor she once served under, for her grandchildren, some of whom haven't spoken to her in 5 years. She prays for people she hasn't seen in decades. She prays over newspaper headlines. She prays over the sound of sirens in the distance. At first, no one knew, but then one of the night nurses, a young woman named Tricia, had a breakdown during her shift. Her mother had just died of cancer. Her fiancé had walked out. Her life was unraveling. She wandered into the lounge at 4:30 a.m. and found Evelyn praying. Evelyn didn't know the situation, but as Tricia stood there trying to hide her tears, Evelyn turned and said something that shattered her. "You're not abandoned. He still hears you." No one had said those words to Tricia in years. She wept on Evelyn's lap like a child. From that night on, everything changed. Tricia told others. More staff began stopping by. Requests started coming in. Evelyn started a prayer book, handwritten with names, written with shaky fingers and a stubborn pen. The list got longer. Nurses, children, families of residents, strangers, politicians, prisoners. Evelyn never left her room, but her prayers went around the world. She isn't seen on stages. She doesn't live stream her intercession, but heaven knows her voice. And here's the twist. One Sunday morning, a pastor from a local church came to visit the facility. He was there to offer communion and sing old hymns. When he got to Evelyn's room, he tried to encourage her by reading Luke 2, the story of Anna, the prophetess who was in the temple daily, worshipping and fasting at 84 years old. Before he could finish, Evelyn smiled and said, "I know her. I'm like her." And she was right. Anna didn't preach sermons, she didn't plant churches, but she was faithful, present, prayerful. And when the Messiah appeared, she was there to witness it. Many of you reading this have felt the ache of invisibility. You used to build, you used to lead, you used to be asked for your opinion. Now the phone doesn't ring, the invitations stop, the calendar is empty. And the enemy wants you to believe your purpose has expired. But Anna was 84 and still showing up. Evelyn was 91 and still storming heaven. And you are still needed, just differently. You may not build walls anymore, but you hold them up through prayer. You may not run programs, but you sustain the ones running through intercession. You are the backbone of the body, not the billboard. And your unseen work is the reason many still stand. Let this truth soak deep. Your greatest impact might not come from your presence, but from your posture. Not standing in front of people, but kneeling before God for them. Don't underestimate the call of intercession. Moses split seas, but it was the prayer of Samuel that shook nations. 1 Samuel 12:23. Paul wrote epistles, but it was the prayers of the saints that opened prison doors. Acts 12:5-7. Jesus himself intercedes for us now, and you're being invited to mirror the ministry of Christ in your later years. So rise up, even if only in spirit. You are not benched, you are not shelved, you are stationed, you are like Anna, waiting in the temple, eyes fixed, heart open, prayers rising like incense. Don't let the world define your season. Let the Spirit do that. You're not just holding on, you're holding it together. And your presence, your faithful, praying, listening, believing presence, is still shaking the gates of hell. The posture of prayer sustains the house, but a heart on fire sets it ablaze. Evelyn didn't just hold things together with intercession. She ignited hope in a place most people come to quietly fade. But you weren't made to quietly fade. You were made to go out blazing. Like Psalm 92:14 says, they will still bear fruit in old age. They will stay fresh and green, not wilted, not dried out, still bearing, still fresh, still green. You were not made to survive old age. You were made to conquer it. There's a man named Fred Carter from Mississippi. He spent his life as a mechanic, not a preacher, not a professor. For 40 years, he fixed engines no one else could fix. His hands were worn, his knees bad, and his eyesight dimmed with time. But at 67, after retiring, he asked God a question that would change everything. What's left for me to do that still matters? That night he had a dream of kids walking barefoot to school on broken roads. Some carried plastic bags as backpacks. One held his math book together with duct tape. When Fred woke up, he couldn't shake the image. So he did what he'd done his whole life. He fixed what was broken. Fred didn't know much about missions. He didn't have a theology degree, but he had a passport, a heart on fire, and a pension check. Within 6 months, he was in rural Uganda, volunteering with a school no one else cared about. He bought shoes, he repaired desks, he taught math with the same patience he once used on engines. But here's the part that haunts you in the best way. On his 70th birthday, Fred gave a speech to the kids under a mango tree. He said, "I've spent most of my life fixing cars, but I wasted years thinking my life didn't count because I never stood behind a pulpit. I realize now this is my sermon." He didn't retire from faith. He refired, and 3 months later, Fred passed away in his sleep in a small hut near the school. At his funeral, held outdoors in a village where most had never met an American, hundreds of children came wearing shoes. Each pair was a verse in the sermon of his life. Fred died empty because he poured it all out. And that's your calling too, not to hoard wisdom, but to hand it off, not to coast into comfort, but to crash into glory, not to sit silently waiting, but to speak, serve, and bless until your last breath. Don't let the fear of irrelevance rob you of your influence. Don't let pain, disappointment, or regret talk you into spiritual retirement. Don't go out quiet. Go out blazing. Bear fruit in your final years. Preach with your presence. Speak life into generations after you. Bless people who'll never be able to pay you back. Tell your story to a world starving for real. Live loud, die empty, because heaven's not looking for people who played it safe. Heaven's preparing to crown those who poured it all out. Father, for every person who thought they were done, awaken them. For every person who feels too old, too tired, too forgotten, fill them with fire. You said in your word that even in old age, your children would bear fruit. So we declare over every elder listening, you will still bear fruit. You are still fresh. You are still green. God, burn up the bitterness and replace it with blessing. Trade regret for revelation. Turn isolation into intercession. Remind them that their life was never meant to end in silence, but in legacy. We pray that their final years will be their fiercest, that their words would carry weight, that their prayers would shake foundations, that their wisdom would light paths for the generations behind them. Let them live loud, let them die empty, and when their race is run, may they hear you say, "Well done." In Jesus' mighty name, amen.